Hi folks, Dave, the Honest Audiophile. This is the BASN ASONE, and these are my Honest Audiophile impressions. I want to thank BASN for sending over the ASONE for review. Do greatly appreciate it. BASN, you rock. Alright, so the BASN ASONE. This will set you back $190 from the bank account if you order it from the BASN website. Currently on Amazon, it is on sale for $160. The BASN ASONE is a 14.2 millimeter planar IEM. It has 16 ohms of impedance, 100 decibels of sensitivity, and a frequency response of 20 Hz to 20 kHz. The BASN ASONE comes in a nice unboxing experience. You get a box with some pictures on the front, some pictures and specs on the back, a little bit of information on the sides, and some branding. Taking off the sleeve, you're greeted by a black box with some branding on the front and then some warranty information on the back. Opening up the lid, you are greeted by a piece of paper which says to enjoy your music with BASN IEMs. Alright, so inside there you're going to be greeted by an accessory box with some branding on the front. It's all metal. It's a little bit big for pockets unless you use cargo pants. And it's got a nice latch to it, and it holds it together very nicely. Opening it up, you're going to be greeted by several different pockets of things, and also, as you can see, you have a 1/4-inch adapter and a cleaning tool. Bag of tips, you get 3 different types of tips, 2 types of silicone, and 1 foam. So you get your pretty standard olive shape. And then you get a triple flange. And then you get foam. And you get small, medium, and large of all 3 of those. That's a nice touch. You also get a little cable clip. And you get an extra cable that has an inline microphone. That's a nice touch as well. I did not use the inline microphone cable. When I'm listening to music, I rarely ever get interrupted by phone calls, and I just use the regular cables. So I don't know how it works. Sorry. I do know it has inline remote with the basic controls like most inline microphones. And then you get the IEMs themselves. So the ASONE, very nicely built. You can get them in several different colors. This is the blue color, which kind of reminds me more of a periwinkle color. It's kind of cool looking. It is transparent on the back, and you can see that planar driver inside there, which is kind of cool. Nice ear hooks. They are just a little bit aggressive, but I didn't find them to be, super painful or hurtful or anything like that. So, not bad. They do connect with MMCX connection. You have a nice split, and you have a cinch that actually stays in place. And then the cable, it has a little bit of a plasticky feel to it, but it bends and moves around and stays well controlled. It doesn't, like kink up and get all tangled. It's a very well controlled cable. And then it terminates into a 3.5. So overall, I like the cable. I find it to be a good cable. No issues there. Kind of wish it didn't have MMCX connection. The shells, for $190, they seem to be a little bit on the cheap side. All plastic. I don't mind the look of them. The design of them is okay for my ear shape. It might work very well for yours. They're not super huge. but they're a little bit on the larger side. Of course, you do have to get a 14.2 millimeter planar inside there. I find that the flat back can be an issue for me on fit, and also the shorter nozzle. I wish I had a little bit longer of a nozzle. Angle is good. So putting some tips on and putting them in your ears, I find that the ASONE does a good job of fitting in the ear. I as I said, they're a little bit on the larger side because of their shape design, but I don't really have an issue with that. They fit in my ears. The shorter nozzle causes a little bit of problems with silicone tips. They don't stay as planted in my ears as I would like. With the foam tips, I'm able to secure them and they stay in place. The ear hooks do a good job of holding everything together. They isolate outside noises very well. I find that you're probably somewhere in about the 65-70% of outside noise is blocked. So normal office settings around the house, in the neighborhoods will do fine. Didn't take any public transit trips, so I do not know how they would work with that or in louder environments. So overall, I like the ASONE's design. It doesn't quite feel as premium as I think it should for the price tag, but overall, it's doable and it doesn't look too shabby. How do they sound, or excuse me, how are they to be driven? You know, what did I use in the listening process? I found that they are picky when it comes to source. The dongles that I used and found drove them the best were the Hifi FC4 NextDrive Spectra X, the Heidi's XO, and also the Audio Engine DAC 3. I found that dongles or sources that were a little bit on the warmer side, that kind of had a warm tint to them, sounded more pleasurable. I found that sources that were a little bit more leaning to the analytical, sterile, brittle, cold, any of those type of sounds, that those sources did not sound as pleasant on the ASONE. Also, I found something very strange, which was that desktop gear did not play really well with it. I don't know if it was a impedance issue or if it was just didn't pair well with my setups, but I didn't really care for them on desktop. So they were tested mostly using a dongle. Tips. I found that the tips also were a significant struggle for me, especially when I first got the ASONE. So I tested them with the stock tips, and I also tried many third-party tips. And I did end up coming back to the stock foam tip. I found that the silicone tips, the triple flange ones, just didn't fit my ears. I don't know if it was the angle that the ASONE is and it just didn't fit my ears, or if it was the build of the triple flange, but whatever way, I just could not get them to be comfortable. It always seemed to be putting pressure at the wrong spot inside my ear, and it just hurt and it was uncomfortable. Didn't sound bad, it was just uncomfortable. The olive-shaped silicone tip actually worked quite well. I did have to use the medium one, and I got a good seal, and they were fairly comfortable. Foam tips held them in place a little bit better. But the issue with the silicone tip was that there was an extra amount of aggression and moments of sibilance, harshness, and just an overall hotness in the treble. And it was a little bit more light on the bass, and I just wasn't really at times getting an enjoyable listen, and there were too many random moments of just ear wincing, like that. So I went with the foam tips, and I found that the foam tips added in a little bit of body into the overall presentation and added some thump in the bass, and then it tamed down that upper mids and treble region, and so there weren't as many moments of sibilance, harshness, and hotness. Before we get into the sonic impressions of the BASN ASONE, I want to thank my supporters through Patreon and YouTube memberships. Thank you very much for all that you provide to the channel. I know that it's a sacrifice to give of your own funds to a channel that you support, so thank you very much. I appreciate it. And all the funds that you provide do go back into the channel, whether it be gear used to produce a video, gear used to do comparisons or to do the review on, or gear to review, or coffee for me to consume while doing a review. So thank you very much for all that you provide. It means a whole lot, and I'm very much appreciative of it. If you're interested in becoming a supporter of the channel, either through Patreon or through YouTube memberships, or giving a one-time gift, please check out the links down below. Also, while you're down there, don't forget to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to the video if you're enjoying it or not. And also to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And don't forget to check off the notification bell. That way you'll know when the next video from the Honest Audiophile is available. Okay, so the BASN ASONE, how do they sound? The ASONE with foam tips have a kind of a just overall pleasurable listen, with random moments of not so pleasurable. So let me try to clarify that. The bass of the BASN ASONE is very light. It doesn't have a lot of impact. It has a good amount of detail retrieval, and it has okay tone and timbre. It is a very light and kind of going through the motions type of bass. You get good detail, but it doesn't have a lot of body to it, doesn't have a lot of authority to it, doesn't have a lot of punch and slam, and it's not really very well extended into the sub bass. I find that the bass just kind of goes through the motions. Adding on the foam tips do help with that, and also depending on what source you use will bring in a little bit more, but don't be expecting a lot of hard-hitting bass here. The ASONE is more about the details and about the tone. So it's not the most accurate and natural sounding bass, but it's not an off-putting bass either. It does have moments of one-noteness, and things will become a little bit clustered and muddled, especially on busier tracks and bass-heavy tracks. The mids. The mids of the ASONE are a mixed bag for me. I find that they're not the most balanced and they're not the most cohesive, but overall they're pleasurable. And I find that they have a, like the bass, the tone of them isn't the most natural, but it's not off-putting. It's an okay sound. But I find that the lower mids are not as forward and not as fleshed out, not as full as the upper mids are. And the lower mids have a little bit of leanness to them. The upper mids are more forward, more full in your face, more elevated. This becomes really prominent with silicone tips. And at times they can be somewhat shouty. And also in the upper mids, you get moments of sibilance. It's not as prominent when you have foam tips on, but when you have silicone tips on, it's very, very prominent, and it comes through way too often. There's also a lot of harshness that comes through. I found that the mids were they were okay at times, and then other times I was like, skip, this song does not sound good. It sounds harsh, it's very sibilant. So it just kind of depends on the type of music that you listen to. And I find that instruments were a little bit of a odd experience. So if you take a piano and you're playing in the lower octaves, it sounded a little bit thin, but it sounded okay. And then as you went into the upper mids, they became more forward and more in your face, and they were more aggressive in their presentation, and they had a little bit more a body to them. And so it just sounded kind of strange. And if you had a mixed group, let's say a quartet, and the bass and the baritone, they sounded okay. They sounded a little bit thin, but they sounded all right. And then you took the tenor or the alto and the soprano, and they became a little bit more forefront, and a little bit more shouty, but they had a little bit more emphasis and a little bit more body. And so the mids were just kind of mixed and at times didn't sound even or cohesive. The treble. The lower treble of the AS1 is elevated, and you get some hotness to it. There's a brightness to the upper mids lower treble region, and it's very elevated. As you extend out into the treble, it kind of rolls a little bit and becomes a little bit more mellow. But it's that initial bottom end of the treble where there's a lot of emphasis, and there's too much sizzle at times, and it can be a little bit hot. And it is a discomfort for me on silicone tips. On foam tips, it's still uncomfortable at times, but not near as much. So I found that the AS1 was an interesting IEM. I don't mind it, but I don't love it either. It's kind of an okay sound with some interesting peaks and valleys in it. And depending on what kind of music you're listening to, or depending on what type of source you're using, it may be pleasurable. Soundstage. Soundstage is pretty good. It does a decent job of portraying different sizes of venues. It has okay depth. It's not the greatest at depth, but it's all right. It does become claustrophobic at times and a little bit muddled and mashed together when it is a busier, more complex, or a bass-heavy track. I found that imaging was okay. It did not fully smoothly transition going across, but it wasn't 3-blob either. It was kind of a little jittery as it went across, and you could hear that on some cymbal crashes that were very extended, and it would kind of skip as it went across, but you didn't really notice it unless you were intentionally listening for it. So I found that the detail retrieval was very good. Resolution is all right. It has its moments of being a little bit harsh, a little bit glary and glassy. And then as far as tone and timbre, it's not the most natural, but it's not off-putting. Things are close enough to being realistic without being a mess of things that you can't tell differences between instruments. I found that with the foam tips, I was able to add in a little bit of note weight and a little bit of body to things, and it sounded a little bit closer than it did with silicone tips, where it was a little bit more on the glassy, glary side of things. So overall, the BASN AS1, it's an okay IEM. I'm not I'm not super impressed because of the price tag of $160 to $190. And the reason why I say that is there's a lot of competition. You have competition like the Shure S12, and the Shure S12 just really, it just spanks the AS1. It is better detailed, way better resolving, and it has more natural and accurate tone and timbre, and it has more body to it. And to me, the Shure S12 just it is the more complete planar. And then you have the TINHIFI T2. I'm sorry, not T2. TINHIFI P1 Max. Wow, whew, it is early in the morning. So the P1 Max has more natural and accurate tone and timbre, and has more note weight and body and a better control. Also has better detail retrieval and better resolution. And I just find that both the S12 and the P1 Max just absolutely sound more accurate and true and realistic and better than the AS1. I like the AS1, but at the price point, it just has too much competition and doesn't do enough to stand out on its own. BASN, thank you for sending over the AS1 and allowing me to hear it, and I appreciate your willingness to allow me to give an honest opinion on your device. I like it, but I don't love it. It's been Dave, the Honest Audiophile. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video. Speaking of next video, somewhere on screen, subscription links, notification bells. If you haven't already, please check those off. Don't forget to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to the video. And also, if you haven't already, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and check out the links down below. There's all kinds of information down there regarding how you contact channel, follow channel, support channel, all that kind of stuff down below. And lastly, don't forget to enjoy the music, and that honesty is the best policy.